Hello and welcome to this session. My name is Dr. Karina Dancer, and together with my colleagues Dr. Stephanie Tempest and Anita Volkert, we would like to share with you some examples of how to use an appreciative strengths-based approach, and in particular the appreciative inquiry cycle during supervision. So we're going to be sharing with you a couple of examples and giving you some ideas on how this might be incorporated into your own practice.
What we'll talk about today is a way of doing effective supervision using the Appreciative Inquiry Cycle. We'll then go into an example of how the Appreciative Inquiry Cycle can be used to create effective supervision, and then applying Appreciative Inquiry Cycle to your own supervisory practices. We'll then summarize and give you a few additional practical resources. The Appreciative Inquiry Cycle is a way of structuring our supervision so that we are focusing on the strengths of a supervisee. It involves defining what the specific situational context is that needs to be addressed or people want to understand better. We then discover what is happening now, what information do we need to gather about the current state of the situation, what are some of the key factors, strengths and challenges influencing this current state. We then have space to dream. What would it look like if it was an ideal situation or there was a desired outcome? What would be different? What would people notice that was different? We then think about what it would take to design that situation. So what would bridge the gap between what is happening now and that ideal state? Finally, we put in a plan to help deliver on that actions. So how would we organize the implementation of these actions? What commitments do we need? What support do we need to ensure the successful implementation of any changes? To illustrate how we might use the Appreciative Inquiry Cycle to create effective supervision, we're going to share with you an example of going through each stage in the Appreciative Inquiry process. So the first one is define, and in this we have a situation where a supervisor is conducting a supervision session with a team to address challenges related to the poor satisfaction scores they're receiving from people who access their service. Moving over to the discover phase, the supervisor begins by asking about the current state and asking the members of the team to share their experiences, their insights, their examples of where person-centered care that they've witnessed or been involved in has happened. It's interesting that the team is also likely to express their unhappiness with the current situation and the feedback, and that the supervisor gives space for this conversation to happen. And then eventually the focus shifts to identifying the positive aspects of care and exploring what has worked well in the past. So the key here is to find out what is happening at the moment, what are people feeling and thinking about it, and it's not necessarily to discount anything that negative that comes out, but it's important to know that eventually you do want to shift the conversation to finding what are the positives that are happening in the situation right now. The next step is to shift the conversation to the dream phase. Now, this is where the supervisor encourages the team to envision the ideal situation where satisfaction scores of people and families accessing the service are consistently high. So they discuss and explore possibilities for creating a positive and satisfying experience, emphasizing the desired outcomes and the impact it would have on the health and well-being of people accessing the service. So this stage can be a little bit challenging, where people maybe need to take a bit of time and have a bit of space to be able to think about that dream state. Sometimes people find it difficult to move beyond what is currently happening. So it could take the supervisor some different lines of questioning to help people to come and see the situation from that different perspective, and to really let their imagination run wild to think about what would the ideal situation look like. So once that dream situation has been articulated, once people have an idea of what it would look like if it was working better, the next stage is to design. So together, the supervisor and the team brainstorm potential actions and strategies to move from the current state to that ideal state. So they consider innovative ideas such as implementing a simplified feedback system, improving staff communication and teamwork amongst the staff, enhancing education and access to information for people and their families, and implementing new protocols for addressing any concerns promptly. So they come up with a range of ways that they feel will bridge that gap between what is happening now and the ideal state. In the design and in the deliver phase, which is the final phase, it is important for us to think about what is working well already and what can be enhanced, rather than focusing on just designing things to solve a problem and then working on the deficits in the situation. So in this example, the supervisor and the team collaboratively develop a plan for implementing the identified changes. So they discuss the roles and responsibilities of the team members and set specific targets, establishing a timeline for the implementation. They also seek that commitment from each of the team members to actively participate in the process to support the proposed changes. So during the implementation phase, the supervisor is still there to provide guidance or resources and supports the team, ensuring they have the necessary tools and training to execute the planned actions effectively. And at the end of the implementation phase, the supervisor and the team reflect on the outcomes and also pause to celebrate the successes of any of those changes that have been made. In the next part of this presentation, we're going to go through the Appreciative Inquiry Cycle again, but we're going to make a suggestion about some questions that you might want to propose when you are working through this cycle in supervision. When we're defining what it is that we want to be focusing on in the supervision context, we can ask questions like, what is the situation? What do you want to address? What would you like to understand better? Can you tell me about something that has happened to you recently and that you want to find out more about? So there are a number of questions that we can ask which help us to set the context for what the discussion is going to look like in this appreciative inquiry cycle. Once we know a broad area of what it is that we want to be looking at, we then go into a little bit more detail and discover what is happening now. So we can also ask the supervisee, when is this happening? Where is this happening? It's likely though that they will not have all of the information, and it's important to ask what additional information do we need to gather about this current state. We can then look through what we already know, identifying some of the key factors that are influencing, what are some of the strengths, what are some of the challenges. We can also think of who we need to involve. Is there other people who are affected by this that maybe we need to get included into this conversation? Or maybe who could have a different or a useful approach to the situation. So it might be that there is other people that would bring a new perspective into the situation. To move the conversation from the reality of what is happening now in the discover phase to the dream or the ideal of what is happening in this phase, it might take a little bit of work and it might take a little bit of time. So to start off with, you might ask, well, what do you envision the ideal situation or the desired outcome to be? What would it look like? Tell me what you would see that was different. So what would it look like if everything is working at its best? You could also try and approach it from what would somebody else say that has a stake in this situation, what would they think is ideal? So that's where we try and get a different perspective, because sometimes it's easier for us to think about what other people might say is ideal rather than what we think is ideal. You can also ask, what do you personally feel would make the biggest difference? So that is helping us to understand what the difference would be. And if you could start from nothing, what would you want to create, or what would you want to do? So we're trying to really move out of the current situation, out of the limitations that people often think about in their current situations, to remove some of those barriers so that people can think more broadly and wider. Once we've got an idea of what the dream or the ideal state would look like, we then can move into a more practical approach of what are some of the specific actions and steps can you take to move from the current state to the ideal state. So what strategies, resources, or changes are necessary to achieve the desired outcome? What is one thing you want to do first? What would you do next? So that is trying to get a very practical, what is the first step? What do you feel confident that you would be able to do next? Who do you feel you need help to design what it is to do next? So who in this situation would be able to support this? And what other support do you need? So going from this ideal state into the design phase is really trying to bring things back into reality, back into something that's practical and that the person feels that it is doable and it's actionable. The final stage is the deliver stage, and this builds from the design stage where we have started to get a list of things that might need to be done, and in the deliver stage we think about how are we going to plan and organize to do these actions. The other thing is it's about the commitments and support that are needed to ensure the successful implementation of the changes. And you can also in this stage get a sense of what is the commitment of the person who is in the driving seat to make these changes as well. So it might be at this stage that you hear somebody maybe feeling a little bit wobbly about what they can actually do, and this is a chance for you to really support them to make any changes practical and feel like they are actually able to do them. In summary, the Appreciative Inquiry Cycle, it provides a framework for effective supervision that focuses on strengths, possibilities, and improvements. So it really encourages the supervisor to engage in reflective and generative conversations with the supervisee, and this creates a supportive and growth-orientated environment. So it starts by using a strength rather than a deficit approach, so that can be quite motivating. So the key point that we've talked about in this session is those generative questions, and these offer a starting point for your conversations, but you are encouraged to develop your own style, look at your own sense of questions, and really make sure that the questions that you're using are authentic to yourself. So if you would like any further information, we suggest that you read the Supervision for Occupational Therapy textbook, and in particular Chapter 8, which is Working Through Tensions in Supervision. And in this chapter, we use the Appreciative Inquiry Cycle to share how we work through some common challenges, some common tensions that often come up in supervision.
So in this session, we have talked about using the Appreciative Inquiry Cycle and how that can be applied to some supervision examples. So we hope that you have found some of the ideas practical and there are a few takeaways that you can use in your own practice.